So the pluses are that they expand the role that my students can have in a company. Rather than just making simple decisions about form, they're able to make decisions about service, about the experience. It gives them a place at the table that's much more elevated than it would have been 10 years ago. Nobody goes to a designer and says, hey, how do you think we should design something so it'll make people feel better and they'll feel really attached to our brand? That's a good question. That's not the kind of questions you typically got in design schools. You get questions like, your client has a poster and they want to attract people to this conference. What can we do? Not too dissimilar, but it's limited. And so we're seeing a widening of that. So as an academic, it helps my students get better jobs. It helps them be more persuasive. It helps them have a greater impact on the way we communicate as human beings. That's the grand sort of statement, right? But that's the goal, right? Is we communicate better. But in practical levels, for the clients that I work with, it brings more people to the table in different points of view. There's a real bias in this country towards this idea of the expert, that someone's an expert. I'm a professor, I'm supposed to be an expert at something. I'm not. You asked me earlier about how do I teach this process to the students. I tell them I don't know a lot. When they ask me a question, I say, if I don't know it, I'll tell you I don't know it. I don't like that idea of experts all the time. So what happens often in businesses is that there's the expert or the leader in the room who doesn't like an idea, so it gets shot down. So that great idea, who knows what it could be worth someday? By applying the design thinking principles, what you're saying is, forget about the experts. IDEO often talks about this idea of start with a beginner's mind. Imagine that you don't know anything, that you're approaching something for the very first time. How would you do that? It's an open-mindedness that works beautifully with the idea of user-centered design. This is why, by the way, computer interfaces have been so god-awful for so long. Engineers design them, not designers. Engineers, for the longest time in the PC world, were the only ones who understand the computers enough to make something work on the screen. They weren't thinking about what made sense for me as a user who needed to use this tool. They were doing what was expedient for the engineer to do. We still see it. Microsoft is a good example of that, right? So we still see that in lots of technologies. Car technologies is the same. It's getting better. It's all getting better. There's a higher degree of awareness about design and industrial design, but it's still often the manufacturing and the engineers that are driving it, not the user experience. It's one of the main things Apple has brought to the table is that there's a user experience. They understand that someone's got to do something with the phone. They understand that first. They put that first. So then, when you think about that, that has all sorts of business implications. And that's how they run their business. I think the limitations are not so much a part of the process as they are people's idea about what the process is. I think in the business press, a lot of people believe that design thinking is going to give you the absolute correct answer and that's the end of the story. It doesn't work that way. I mean, I think it's really an outline for a methodology for lots of flexible solutions, lots of ways of working flexibly with different groups of people that'll give a good business executive a number of different things, a number of different pieces of information on which to make further decisions, like how to make investments, how to hire people, how to make resources allocated in the most efficient ways, those types of things. So as much as anything, this design process can help executives make better decisions about what to do with their businesses next. I think they've been around for about 25 years, started in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and they're really one of the first multidisciplinary design firms to come along. So they started as industrial designers. They would do a lot of industrial design work, a lot with the big computer companies. And then as they started to think more about this idea of user-centered design, they realized that there was a limit to how much they knew. So they would bring in anthropologists to work with them. They would bring in psychologists. They would bring in ethnographers who really know research quite well. Then they would bring in programmers. They would bring in hardware guys. So what you see at IDEO is a very multidisciplinary team. They would bring in philosophers and psychologists to talk about things. So they were understanding that if you're going to be user-centered, you better understand how human beings operate in the world. A lot of graphic designers, we don't know anything about that. We never did any user testing. We would have crits in the studio, but we weren't asking somebody the simplest thing like, can you read the type? Does that color work on that background? Is it legible? That's as far as we would get for things like that. But as the experiences that we need to have as humans and the services we need to have as humans get more complicated, we need to better understand how humans interact with the world, how we interact with each other, right? So all those things happened. And so they're one of the first design firms that really and truly were multidisciplinary. So a client could hire them to design a fax machine for them, but also to design the interface for a website that would allow people to buy the fax machine. Medical devices. They're looking now at designing business services, not just the objects anymore. So it's really moved on beyond just designing a box for something or designing the printer that comes to you when you buy a laptop for free. You get the free printer. It's much more about the whole experience that people are having.